My daughter-in-law sued me to try and take my husband's inheritance. That old woman abuses everyone, and her Alzheimer's is starting. We need to protect the money." The judge looked at her and said, "Ma'am, she is the most respected judge in the city, and I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment from what city you are watching me. That way, I will be able to see how far my story has come." My name is Charlotte Brooks. I'm 60 years old, and for the past 25 years, I have been a judge at the Miami-Dade County Superior Court. I thought I had seen every kind of betrayal in my courtroom, but I never imagined the worst would come from my own family. It all started on a Tuesday morning. I had just gotten back from my morning walk when I found the envelope in my mailbox. It was thick, official, with the seal of the civil court. For a moment, I thought it might be some document related to my work. But when I saw my name listed as the defendant, I felt my world collapse. "Charlotte Brooks versus Sarah Mendoza Brooks," I read aloud, my hands trembling slightly. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, the woman I considered the daughter I never had. I sat down in my kitchen, my morning coffee growing cold as I read line by line. Sarah was alleging that I suffered from severe cognitive decline, that I was abusive to the family, and that I was a danger to myself and others. She was petitioning the court to declare me mentally incompetent and to appoint her and my son David as my legal guardians. The words blurred in front of my eyes: mentally incompetent, family abuse, danger to society. Each accusation was like a slap in the face. How was it possible that the woman I had embraced when David introduced her 8 years ago, the same woman who had cried on my shoulder when she had marital problems, was now trying to take everything from me? The telephone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my judicial assistant, Linda. "Charlotte, are you okay? You look terrible," she said when I arrived at my office an hour later. I didn't know whether to tell her. For years I had kept my personal life separate from my work, but this situation was different. If Sarah succeeded, my 25-year career as a judge would be ruined. "Linda, I need you to review something for me," I finally said, handing her a copy of the documents. "But this stays just between us." I watched her expression change as she read. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with indignation. "Your daughter-in-law is doing this? The same one who always comes here asking for favors?" Her voice rose with each word. It was true. Sarah had come to my office dozens of times in the past few years. She always needed something: references for jobs she never kept, recommendation letters for apartments she couldn't afford, connections for business opportunities that invariably failed. And I, like a fool, always said yes. I remembered the last time she had been here, just 3 weeks ago. She had arrived in tears, saying that she and David were having financial problems, that David's construction business was not doing well, and that they might lose their house. "Charlotte, you're the only one who can help us," she had said, taking my hands in hers. "We just need a small loan to get us through." I gave her $20,000 from my savings, money I had been putting away for my retirement. I did it because I loved her, because I trusted her, because I thought that's what family does. Now I understood why she had been so specific about my finances during that conversation. She had asked me about my investments, my properties, even my will. I thought she was just concerned about my well-being, like any loving daughter-in-law. "How naive you were, Charlotte." Linda's voice brought me back to the present. "This is serious. If she goes ahead with this lawsuit, even if she loses, it could permanently damage your reputation." She was right. In the legal world, even baseless accusations can tarnish a career. Rumors spread fast, and trust once lost is nearly impossible to regain. That night, when I got home, I found David waiting for me in my driveway. My 35-year-old son looked uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze as he nervously played with his car keys. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, "about the lawsuit your wife filed against me." I responded directly. I had no energy for small talk. David flinched. "You know already?" "Of course I know, David. Seriously, did you think you could do this behind my back?" My son sighed deeply, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy who used to run into my arms when he had nightmares. "Mom, Sarah is worried about you. You've been different lately." "Different how?" "More forgetful. Sometimes you repeat the same stories. Last month you forgot my birthday." I froze. It was true that I had forgotten his birthday, but it was because I had been working on a particularly complex case. As for repeating stories, didn't everyone do that as they got older? "David, I forget things just like any 60-year-old person. That doesn't mean I'm losing my mind." "Sarah says you've also been aggressive, that you yelled at her the last time she came to visit." I remembered that occasion. Sarah had arrived unannounced, as usual, and had started rearranging my kitchen without permission. When I asked her to stop, she had accused me of being stubborn and impossible. Yes, I had raised my voice, but who wouldn't be annoyed in that situation? "Your wife is manipulating the truth, David, and apparently you too." But as I spoke, a small seed of doubt began to grow in my mind. What if they were right? What if I really was losing my faculties and I was the last to realize it? David left that night without resolving anything, and I was left alone with my thoughts and my fears. For the first time in decades, I felt truly vulnerable. Sarah had achieved what no criminal in my courtroom had ever managed. She had made me doubt myself. But as I lay awake that night, something stronger than fear began to emerge, the same determination that had led me to become one of the most respected judges in the county. If Sarah wanted a legal battle, she would get one. But she didn't know who she was messing with. I couldn't sleep all night. I stayed in the living room surrounded by photo albums I hadn't opened in years, trying to understand how I had gotten to this point. The pictures took me back 8 years, to when David first brought Sarah over for dinner. I remember I had been so excited. David had had some serious relationships before, but he had never brought anyone home. Sarah arrived in a navy blue dress, her hair perfectly styled, and a smile that lit up the whole room. "Mrs. Brooks, David has told me so much about you," she had said, hugging me as if we had known each other forever. "It's an honor to meet the most respected judge in Miami." From the first moment, Sarah made me feel special. She would ask me about my cases, show interest in my career, and ask for my advice on everything. During dinner, she praised my food so much that I insisted on giving her my grandmother's recipes. When they left that night, I thought David had found the perfect woman. "I like her," I told David on the phone the next day. "You can tell she loves you and respects family." How wrong I was. In the following months, Sarah became a constant presence in my life. She would show up at my house unannounced, always with some excuse. She had been in the neighborhood, she needed a recipe. She wanted my opinion on something. At first, I loved the attention. After years of living alone since my husband passed, having someone who cared about me felt wonderful. "Charlotte, have you eaten today?" she would ask, checking my refrigerator. "You need to take better care of yourself. David and I worry about you." There was always a subtle criticism wrapped in concern. My dishes were dirty, my house was messy, my clothes were out of style. But she said it with such sweetness that I only felt gratitude for having someone who paid attention to those details. 6 months after their first meeting, David announced they were getting married. Sarah cried with happiness when she asked me to stand in as her mother at the wedding. "My mom passed away when I was little," she explained through tears. "I always dreamed of having a mother figure at my wedding. Would you do that for me?" Of course I said yes. Not only that, I insisted on paying for most of the wedding. He was my only son, and Sarah had no family who could afford a proper celebration. I spent $40,000 of my savings on that wedding, but seeing them happy was worth every penny, or so I thought. Looking back now, I can see the signs I ignored. During the wedding preparations, Sarah made all the decisions without consulting me, even though I was the one paying. When I suggested something, she would say with a condescending smile, "Charlotte, you're so traditional. Trust me, I know what's in style." After the wedding, the visits became more frequent and more invasive. Sarah had a key to my house. I had given it to her for emergencies, and she used it freely. She would arrive when I wasn't there and rearrange my things. "I'm just helping," she would say when I confronted her. "This house is too big for you to handle alone. David and I think you should consider moving to something smaller." She gradually began to interfere with my decisions. When I mentioned I was thinking of renovating the kitchen, she convinced me it wasn't worth it. When I talked about selling some stocks to diversify my investments, she suggested I wait because the market was too volatile. You're very smart, Charlotte, but modern finances are complicated. You should let David and I help you with those decisions. The couple's financial problems began in their second year of marriage. First, it was David's construction business, which needed seed money. I loaned them $50,000. Then, Sarah lost her job at the real estate agency, and they needed help with their mortgage for 6 months. After that, Sarah's car broke down, and she needed a new one to look for a job more effectively. Each loan was accompanied by tears, hugs, and promises of repayment that never came true. And I kept giving because I thought that's what families did. "You're so generous, Charlotte," Sarah would say after each loan. "David and I are so lucky to have you. We'll pay you back someday when our business takes off." But the business never took off. There was always a new crisis, a new emergency that required my financial intervention. In 5 years, I had loaned them more than $200,000 that I never saw again. There were also more subtle changes. Sarah began to question my decisions more directly. When I forgot to bring a gift to a neighbor's baby shower, she said, "Charlotte, how can you be so inconsiderate? Poor Maria was expecting you to come with something." When I arrived late to a family dinner because I had had to work late on a case, Sarah sighed dramatically. "Charlotte, you're not getting any younger. Maybe it's time to consider retirement before work affects you more." Each comment was like a drop of poison, so small it was barely noticeable, but cumulative in its effect. Gradually, I began to doubt myself, to question decisions I had once made with confidence. The most subtle manipulation came in the last 2 years. Sarah started making comments about my mental health in front of other family members and friends. "Charlotte's been a little confused lately," she would tell David when she thought I wasn't listening. "Yesterday, she told me the same story 3 times. "We're worried about her," she would confide in my sister during family gatherings. "Sometimes she forgets important things. The other day she left the stove on all night." That had never happened, but when my sister asked me about it, Sarah had already planted the seed of doubt. "Are you sure it didn't happen, Charlotte? Maybe you just don't remember." Now, sitting in my living room at 3 in the morning, surrounded by photographic evidence of 8 years of gradual manipulation, I could finally see the full pattern. Sarah hadn't come into our lives for love. She had come with a plan that was about to reach its climax with this lawsuit of mental incompetence. But Sarah had made a crucial mistake. She had underestimated the woman who had spent 25 years learning to detect liars, manipulators, and con artists in her courtroom. And now, for the first time in years, I felt completely awake. The next day, I arrived at my office with a determination I hadn't felt in years. If Sarah wanted to play dirty, I was going to teach her what an experienced judge could do when she decided to really investigate. "Linda," I said to my assistant, "I need you to do something for me, but it has to be absolutely confidential." "Of course, Charlotte. What do you need?" "I want a complete report on Sarah Mendoza, everything you can find. Work history, credit history, public records, any legal proceedings she's been involved in." Linda raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. After working with me for 15 years, she knew that when I asked for something like this, I had my reasons. While I waited for the information, I decided to do my own investigation. I started by calling some contacts in the real estate sector where Sarah had supposedly worked. "Sarah Mendoza?" Patricia Vega, a real estate agent I had known for years, said to me. "Yeah, she worked here for a few months. We had to fire her." "Why?" Patricia hesitated for a moment. "Charlotte, you know I don't like to speak ill of anyone, but that woman was problematic. She lied to clients about properties, inflated prices, and worst of all, we found out she was using confidential information from our clients for her own benefit." My stomach tightened. "What kind of information?" "Personal financial information. She had access to clients' bank statements and tax returns, and we found evidence that she had been taking notes on their assets. When we confronted her, she said she was just being thorough in her work." That same afternoon, Linda came back with a file that left me breathless. Sarah Mendoza was not who I thought she was. Her real name was Sarah Miller, and she had legally changed her identity 5 years before meeting David. "Charlotte," Linda said, her voice trembling slightly, "you have to see this." The documents revealed a terrifying pattern. Sarah Miller had been married twice before. Her first husband, a man named Robert Chen, had died in a car accident 3 years after marrying her. During the probate process, Robert's family had alleged that Sarah had manipulated the elderly man into changing his will, leaving everything to her instead of his children. The case never went to trial because Sarah accepted an out-of-court settlement, but the documents showed she had received more than $500,000. Her second marriage was to a widower named James Anderson. According to the records, James had filed for divorce, alleging emotional abuse and financial manipulation. In his sworn statement, James claimed that Sarah had tried to convince him that he was losing his memory and that he needed help managing his finances. "She made me feel like I was going crazy," James had written in his statement. "She constantly told me I had forgotten conversations we never had, that I had made promises I never made. I gradually began to doubt my own memory." The similarities to my situation were chilling, but the most disturbing thing was that James Anderson had died of a heart attack 6 months after filing for divorce before the case was resolved. "Linda," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I need you to contact the lawyer who represented James Anderson, and I also want to talk to Robert Chen's children." Over the next few days, I pieced together the true story of the woman who had been living in my house, manipulating my family, and was now trying to declare me incompetent. I called Patricia Chen, Robert's daughter. Her voice broke when I explained who I was and why I was calling. "We knew she would do this again," Patricia told me. "We tried to warn James Anderson's family, but they didn't believe us. They thought we were just resentful about the money." "Tell me about your father," I asked. "My father was a brilliant man, a retired engineer. When he met Sarah, he had just lost my mother after 50 years of marriage. He was vulnerable, lonely. She took advantage of that." Patricia told me how Sarah had gradually isolated Robert from his children, convincing him they only wanted his money. How she had planted doubts about Robert's mental health, suggesting he needed help making important decisions. In the end, Dad changed his will without telling us anything. When he passed, we discovered that Sarah had inherited everything. But the money wasn't the worst part, Charlotte. The worst part was that the last years of my father's life were miserable. He believed he was going crazy, that he was a burden to everyone. Patricia's words hit me like a hammer. It was exactly what Sarah was trying to do to me. I also spoke with Michael Anderson, James's brother. His story was even more disturbing. "James was my best friend, not just my brother," Michael told me. "When he started dating Sarah, he seemed renewed, happy at first. But he gradually changed. He became anxious, insecure. He constantly asked us if he had said or done things he couldn't remember." "And what did you think?" "At first we thought maybe it was work stress or age. James was 62. But when he finally told us what Sarah was doing, it all made sense." Michael explained how Sarah had been meticulously documenting every little forgetfulness of James, every moment of normal confusion. She kept a detailed diary of supposed incidents she used to prove that James was losing his mental faculties. She had pages and pages of notes, Michael continued. Date, time, incident. But when James showed us the diary, we realized that half the things she had written had never happened or had been taken completely out of context. "What happened when he filed for divorce?" Michael's voice turned bitter. "Sarah counterattacked. She filed her own case, alleging that James was mentally incompetent and had developed dementia. She used that diary as evidence, and the judge ordered a complete psychological evaluation. James was scheduled to have it the week after he died. That night, I sat in my study, organizing all the information I had collected. The pattern was clear. Sarah was a predator who specialized in vulnerable older adults. Her method was always the same: gain trust, isolate the victim, sow doubts about their mental competence, and then attack legally when the victim was most vulnerable. But there was something Sarah hadn't considered. I was not a defenseless victim. I was a judge with 25 years of experience, contacts throughout the legal system, and now I knew exactly who she was. The next day, I started taking my own notes. Every interaction with Sarah, every phone call, every visit. If she wanted to play the documentation game, I was going to teach her how it was really played. I also installed discreet security cameras in my house. If Sarah was going to keep using her keys to let herself in without permission, I wanted evidence of everything she did while I was gone. But my most important discovery came when I contacted the lawyer who had represented James Anderson. He confirmed something I had suspected. Sarah had used the exact same attorney for all 3 cases, a man named Marcus Riley, who specialized in cases of guardianship and mental incompetence. "It's interesting that you're calling me," James's lawyer said when he finally agreed to speak with me. "Marcus Riley contacted me last week, asking about legal precedents for cases of mental incompetence in older adults, specifically cases that involved retired judges." The blood in my veins ran cold. Sarah had not only planned this, but she had been preparing specifically to face someone with my legal background. That night, as I reviewed all the documents spread out on my dining room table, I felt a mix of terror and determination. Sarah had made a crucial mistake. She had underestimated my ability to fight back. But I also realized something more terrifying. Sarah hadn't chosen David for love, or even for easy money. She had chosen me as her target from the beginning. David had simply been the means to get to me. And now, for the first time in years, I had to admit that I was scared. I couldn't keep the secret any longer. David had a right to know who the woman he had been married to for 8 years really was. But I also knew that presenting him with the truth about Sarah would be like tearing out his heart. I asked him to meet me at my house on a Friday night. Sarah was at one of her business meetings. I now suspected she was probably with Marcus Riley, planning her next legal move. "David, sit down," I said when he arrived. "We have to talk about Sarah." "Mom, if this is about the lawsuit, I already told you that she's just worried about your well-being." "Your wife's name isn't Sarah," I said bluntly. David looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "What are you talking about?" I handed him the folder with all the documents I had collected. "Her real name is Sarah Miller. She legally changed her identity 5 years before she met you." I watched the color drain from his face as he leafed through the papers. His hands trembled when he reached the photos of Sarah's 2 previous husbands. This can't be real," David murmured. "Look at me," I said, taking his hands in mine. "Your wife is a professional con artist. She specializes in vulnerable older men. You weren't her target, I was." "No." David shook his head violently. "This is impossible. Sarah loves me. We've been married for 8 years. And how much of my money have you 2 borrowed in those 8 years? David was silent. We both knew the answer. More than $200,000. Money you've never paid back and have no intention of paying back. Mom, all young marriages go through financial difficulties. That doesn't mean Sarah is a con artist, a murderer." The words came out harsher than I intended. David stood up abruptly. "A murderer? Mom, now you're just being delusional." "Sit down and let me finish," I said with the voice I used in my courtroom. 2 men have died after meeting your wife, both at convenient times for her. I explained everything. Robert Chen and his death after changing his will, James Anderson and his heart attack just before the psychological evaluation that would have proved his mental competence. "They're coincidences," David insisted, but his voice sounded less convinced. "Really? And it's also a coincidence that she used the same lawyer for all 3 cases, that she followed the exact same pattern with you and with me?" I showed him the notes Sarah had been taking on my supposed episodes of confusion. David immediately recognized them. He had seen them on Sarah's desk at home. She told me she was taking them because she was worried about you, David murmured, to help you remember better. David, look at me. Have you ever personally witnessed one of these supposed episodes she describes? David was pensive for a long moment. Not directly, but Sarah told me about them, like when you forgot to turn off the faucet and flooded the bathroom. That never happened. Or when you left your car keys in the refrigerator. That didn't happen either. Or when you invited the same neighbors over for dinner twice in the same week because you forgot the first invitation. David, I'm beginning to think you're the one who needs a mental evaluation if you believe all these lies. The frustration in his voice was palpable. So you're saying Sarah made all of this up? She not only made it up, she meticulously documented it to use against me in court. I showed him copies of the diaries Sarah Miller had kept on her previous husbands. The patterns were identical. David read in silence for several minutes. When he finally looked up, his eyes were full of tears. How could I not have noticed? Because she's very good at what she does. She's had years of practice manipulating good men like you. But if this is true, why did she marry me? I'm a builder. I'm not rich like her other husbands. Because I am, and you were her entryway into my life. The realization hit David like a slap. Are you telling me our whole marriage has been a lie? I didn't know how to answer that question without completely destroying him. I don't know, son. I just know that her intentions toward me were never genuine. David sank onto the sofa, putting his head in his hands. What am I going to do? First, you're going to help me stop her, and then you're going to decide if you can live with a woman who is capable of this. At that moment, we heard the sound of a key in the front door. Sarah had returned. David, what are you doing here so late? Sarah asked as she entered the living room, her eyes immediately fixed on the documents spread out on the coffee table. What is all this? David couldn't even look at her. Sarah walked over and picked up one of the papers. It was a copy of her original birth certificate with the name Sarah Miller clearly visible. The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. Where did you get this? It doesn't matter where, I said, standing up to face her. What matters is that we now know exactly who you are. Sarah straightened up, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw her true personality. The sweetness disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice had lost all pretense of innocence. No? Then you didn't know Robert Chen or James Anderson? Sarah looked quickly toward David, evaluating how much he knew. David, honey, what has this woman been telling you? Don't talk to me like I'm a child, David finally exploded, finding his voice. Is it true? Were you married before? That was a long time ago. It has no relevance to our current life. Twice, David pressed, and both husbands died, leaving you money. People die, David. That doesn't mean I had anything to do with it. And the mental incompetence lawsuit you filed against me, is that also irrelevant? Sarah changed tactics immediately. Her eyes filled with fake tears and her voice became brittle. David, I'm trying to protect your family. Your mother is losing her mental faculties. Can't you see it? She's paranoid, inventing conspiracies about me. This is exactly the kind of behavior that worries me. I'm inventing that you changed your name from Sarah Miller to Sarah Mendoza. People change their names for many reasons. Maybe I wanted to start over after losing my first husbands. I'm inventing that you kept a diary of my supposed episodes of confusion. I was documenting my concerns to show them to a doctor. I'm inventing that your lawyer specializes in mental incompetence cases. For the first time, Sarah hesitated. I looked for the best lawyer I could find. David stood up slowly. Sarah, look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Did you ever truly love me? Sarah looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, all pretense had disappeared from her voice. Love is a luxury not all of us can afford, David. That admission was like a knife in my son's heart. I watched him break in front of my eyes. Get out, David said in a broken voice. Get out of my mother's house right now." "David, you can't believe the lies of this senile woman." "Get out!" David shouted with a force I didn't know he had. Sarah looked at both of us, calculating her options. Finally, she picked up her purse and headed for the door. "This isn't over," she said to me before she left. "The lawsuit is still on. And now I have even more evidence of your paranoia and erratic behavior." The door closed behind her with a bang that echoed throughout the house. David collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing like I hadn't seen him do since he was a child. "Mom," he said through his tears, "I am so sorry. I didn't know. I never imagined." "I know, son," I said, holding him. "But now that we know the truth, we can fight this together." But as I comforted my heartbroken son, I couldn't get Sarah's last words out of my mind. She was right about one thing. This wasn't over. In fact, it had probably just begun for real. 3 weeks after Sarah left my house that night, I received the official notification. The hearing to determine my mental competence was scheduled for Thursday, March 15th at 9:00 a.m. in Courtroom 3B of the Miami-Dade County Civil Courthouse, the very same courtroom where I had presided over hundreds of cases during my career. The irony was not lost on me. David had temporarily moved into my house after finding Sarah packing her most valuable belongings and emptying their joint bank account. My son was devastated, but he was also determined to help me fight the woman who had destroyed his life. "I can't believe I was so blind," he would repeat every day as we reviewed the legal documents. "Sarah is a professional, David. She makes a living by deceiving good people." We had hired Elena Morales, one of the best defense attorneys for guardianship cases in the state. Elena was 45 years old. She was brilliant and fierce in court, but even she admitted the case would be complicated. "Charlotte, the problem is that Sarah has extensive documentation," Elena explained to me during one of our preparatory meetings. 8 years of detailed notes, testimonies from David about your supposed episodes of confusion, and now she can add paranoid behavior after what happened when you discovered her real identity. "But all that documentation is based on lies. We have to prove that, and it won't be easy." Elena's strategy was threefold. First, to prove my current mental competence through independent psychological evaluations. Second, to expose Sarah's pattern of fraudulent behavior. And third, to present evidence of her financial motives. "We also have an advantage," Elena added with a smile. "The judge assigned to the case is Judge Vasquez. You worked with him for years before he was appointed to the bench." That comforted me a little, but I knew that Judge Vasquez would have to be completely impartial, especially when it came to me. The days leading up to the hearing were the most difficult of my life. I underwent a complete battery of psychological and neurological tests. Memory exams, cognitive tests, personality evaluations, all to prove something I knew to be true, that I was perfectly sane. The results were categorical. Dr. Robert Herrera, a forensic neuropsychologist, concluded that my cognitive function was above average for my age, with no signs of dementia or mental decline. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, after reviewing all the tests, "you have the brain of a 40-year-old woman. Anyone who questions your mental competence is either misinformed or has ulterior motives." But I knew that Sarah wouldn't stand by. Through David, who maintained limited contact with her to get information, we learned that she had been contacting neighbors, old friends, even colleagues from my work, trying to find someone who would corroborate her allegations about my supposed mental decline. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up, going over everything I had discovered about Sarah, mentally organizing the arguments that Elena would present. But I also thought about something else. How this woman had been manipulating not only my money, but my perception of myself for years. I got up and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The eyes that looked back at me were those of a strong, intelligent, competent woman, not someone who was losing her mind. Sarah had tried to make me doubt what I saw in that mirror, but she couldn't anymore. On the day of the hearing, I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes before the scheduled time. Elena was already there, reviewing her notes one last time. "Ready?" she asked me. "I've been preparing for this for 25 years. I replied. When we entered courtroom 3B, I immediately recognized several people. There was Marcus Riley, Sarah's lawyer, a thin man in his 50s with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Next to him was Sarah, dressed conservatively, with a perfectly rehearsed expression of concern. David was also sitting on the defense side, and to my surprise, I saw Linda in the gallery along with Dr. Herrera and Patricia Chen, Robert Chen's daughter, who had come all the way from Orlando to testify. Judge Vasquez entered the courtroom with the solemnity the moment required. He was a man my age, with completely gray hair and a presence that commanded respect. When his eyes met mine for a moment, I saw a flash of recognition, but his expression remained completely professional. "Good morning," Judge Vasquez began. "We are here for the hearing in the case of Mendoza versus Brooks regarding the petition for guardianship due to mental incompetence. Mr. Riley, can you proceed with your opening statement?" Marcus Riley stood up confidently. "Your Honor, we are here today because a family is concerned about their matriarch. Charlotte Brooks, 60 years old, has shown progressive signs of cognitive decline that put herself and her family at risk." Riley began to present Sarah's evidence, the detailed diary of my supposed episodes of confusion, David's testimonies about my erratic behavior, and what he called my recent paranoia, demonstrated by my unfounded accusations against Sarah. "Mrs. Mendoza is not seeking personal gain," Riley continued. "She simply wants to ensure that Mrs. Brooks receives the care and supervision she needs to protect her interests and well-being." When it was Elena's turn, she stood up with a calm that radiated confidence. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of mental decline, but a case of elaborate fraud. Mrs. Sarah Mendoza, whose real name is Sarah Miller, is a professional con artist who has specialized in targeting vulnerable older adults." Elena methodically presented all the evidence we had collected: Sarah's false identity, her previous marriages, the convenient deaths of her husbands, and the identical pattern of accusations of mental incompetence. "Mrs. Brooks is not losing her mental faculties," Elena declared. "She is the victim of a systematic campaign of psychological manipulation designed to make her doubt her own sanity." Riley's first witness was Sarah herself. She approached the stand with a hesitant step, as if it pained her to have to testify against someone she loved. "Mrs. Mendoza," Riley began, "can you describe some of the episodes that concern you regarding Mrs. Brooks?" Sarah spoke with a broken voice about my supposed forgetfulness, my increasing aggression, and my recent paranoia. Her performance was perfect, a concerned daughter-in-law who only wanted the best for her mother-in-law. But when Elena stood up for the cross-examination, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed completely. "Mrs. Miller," Elena began, deliberately using her real name, "is it true that you legally changed your name from Sarah Miller to Sarah Mendoza 5 years ago?" "Objection!" Riley jumped up. "Irrelevant!" "Overruled," Judge Vasquez replied. "The witness can answer." Sarah hesitated. "Yes, I changed my name." "And is it true that you were married to a man named Robert Chen, who died, leaving you an inheritance of $500,000? That was a long time ago. And you were also married to James Anderson, who died while he was in the process of divorcing you after accusing you of financial manipulation and emotional abuse." This time, Sarah was silent for several seconds. "The circumstances were different." Elena continued methodically destroying Sarah's credibility, presenting evidence after evidence of her pattern of fraudulent behavior. "Mrs. Miller, is it true that you hired the same lawyer, Marcus Riley, for the 3 mental incompetence cases you have filed? He's a good lawyer. And is it true that you kept a detailed diary of Mrs. Brooks's supposed episodes of confusion, just as you kept similar diaries on your previous husbands?" Sarah's composure finally broke. "I'm trying to help this family." "Help or exploit?" Elena pressed. "Objection!" Sustained. But the damage was already done. The jury had seen the real Sarah. When Elena finished her cross-examination, Sarah returned to her seat visibly shaken. She was no longer the concerned daughter-in-law. She was a woman exposed. The next witness was David. Marcus Riley tried to use him to corroborate Sarah's allegations, but David had prepared well. It's true that my wife told me about my mother's supposed episodes of confusion, David testified, but I now realize that I never personally witnessed any of these episodes. I relied on my wife's testimony, which was a mistake. When Elena questioned David, he was devastatingly honest about how Sarah had manipulated him into doubting me. My mother is the most intelligent and competent woman I know, David declared. I was a fool for letting anyone convince me otherwise. The last witness was Dr. Soy Herrera, who presented the results of my psychological evaluations. In my professional opinion, he concluded, Charlotte Brooks is in full control of her mental faculties. Any suggestion of mental incompetence is completely unfounded. When the hearing ended, Judge Vasquez retired to deliberate. We waited in silence for 45 minutes that felt like an eternity. When he returned, his expression was serious but clear. I have reviewed all the evidence presented today, he began. It is clear to this court that Mrs. Charlotte Brooks is completely mentally and legally competent. The petition for guardianship is denied. Then he did something unexpected. He looked directly at Sarah. Furthermore, this court finds sufficient evidence of fraud and perjury to refer this case to the district attorney for possible criminal prosecution. Sarah stood up abruptly and ran out of the courtroom, followed by Marcus Riley. I had won. But more importantly than that, I had regained something Sarah had tried to take from me, my self-confidence. 6 months after the hearing, I was sitting in my backyard, enjoying a morning coffee, when David arrived with news I had been waiting for. Mom, he said with a smile I hadn't seen on his face since before he met Sarah. They just arrested Sarah. The coffee caught in my throat. Seriously? The district attorney followed Judge Vasquez's recommendation. They charged her with fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. Apparently, after our hearing, Patricia Chen and Michael Anderson filed their own cases with new evidence. David sat down next to me on the garden bench we had installed the week before. They also arrested Marcus Riley. It turns out he knew exactly what Sarah was doing and had been helping her for years. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because justice had finally been served, but sadness because David had had to go through all of this to get here. How do you feel? I asked him. David sighed deeply, relieved, furious, and ashamed all at the same time. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Sarah is a professional manipulator. Yes, I do, David insisted. I let her manipulate me into doubting you. I failed you when you needed me most. I took his hand in mine. David, look at me. In the end, you did the right thing. When you saw the evidence, you defended me. That's what matters. The last 6 months had been a period of healing for both of us. David had filed for divorce immediately after the hearing and had started therapy to process the trauma of having been manipulated for 8 years. I had also been seeing a therapist, Dr. Rosa Martinez, to process everything that had happened. At first, I thought I didn't need her, but Elena had recommended that I go. Charlotte, Dr. Martinez had told me during one of our first sessions, you have been the victim of systematic psychological abuse for years. That leaves scars, even on someone as strong as you. She was right. For months after the hearing, I would wake up in the middle of the night, questioning my own decisions, wondering if I had really done or said the things Sarah had documented in her fake diary. The psychological damage from Sarah's manipulation had been deeper than I wanted to admit, but gradually, with the help of therapy and David's unconditional support, I had regained my self-confidence. I had also regained something else, the ability to trust my own judgment about people. There's something else, David continued. The investigation revealed that Sarah had other targets besides us. I sat up straighter. What do you mean? Apparently, she had been cultivating relationships with at least 3 other widowers in Miami. One of them, a man named Eduardo Restrepo, had already changed his will to include her as a beneficiary. The blood in my veins ran cold. Is he okay? Yes, thanks to Sarah being arrested before she could complete her plan. I didn't want to think about what that meant, but we both understood the implications. David, did Sarah ever tell you why she chose me specifically? David hesitated. Yes. During one of her last interrogations before the arrest. She said she had researched retired judges because she thought it would be harder for you to seek legal help due to your professional pride. The irony was that Sarah was partially right. My professional pride had initially prevented me from seeking help. I thought I could handle the situation alone, just as I had handled complicated cases for years in my courtroom. But she was wrong about one important thing, David added. She completely underestimated your ability to fight back when you finally decided to. In the weeks following Sarah's arrest, more details began to emerge about the extent of her crimes. The investigation revealed that she had been operating her scheme for at least 15 years, much longer than we had imagined. Robert Chen and James Anderson had not been her first victims. There had been at least 2 other men before them, both in other states. The police believed that Sarah had been moving geographically to prevent patterns from being established. We will probably never know the full extent of what she did, Detective Lisa Rodriguez, who had been leading the investigation, explained to me. But we estimate that she stole at least $1 million over the years. We also discovered that Marcus Riley had been running a whole network of these types of frauds. Sarah was not his only client. He had at least 6 similar active cases in different counties in Florida. It's possible that they have targeted more than 50 older people in the last 10 years, Detective Rodriguez continued. Your case was the one that helped us expose the whole operation. That information gave me a strange sense of purpose. Although I had been victimized, my willingness to fight had prevented Sarah and Riley from harming more people. A month after the arrest, I received an unexpected call. It was Patricia Chen. Charlotte, she said, with an emotional voice, I wanted to thank you. Thanks to your courage in exposing her, we are finally going to get justice for my father. Patricia told me that the investigation had revealed evidence that Sarah had been drugging Robert Chen with medications that affected his memory and judgment during the last months of his life. We could never prove it before, but they found the medications in the house Sarah had shared with James Anderson. Apparently, she kept a complete kit for her operations. The information was nauseating, but also vindicating. All the men Sarah had targeted had been real victims, not men with natural mental decline, as she had alleged. I also received a call from Michael Anderson. Charlotte, I don't know how to thank you. For years I blamed myself for not doing more to protect James, but your bravery in fighting Sarah helped me understand that he was the victim of a criminal, not a man who was losing his mind. These conversations helped me process my own experience. For months, I had struggled with feelings of shame for having been deceived. But by talking to the families of Sarah's other victims, I understood that it had not been my fault or theirs. Sarah was a sophisticated predator who had perfected her techniques over years. The fact that she had finally been stopped was not because she wasn't skilled, but because this time she had attacked someone who had the resources and the determination to fight back. Sarah's trial was scheduled for the next year. The prosecutor had told me that it would be a strong case, especially with all the evidence we had collected and the testimonies from the families of the other victims. She'll probably get between 20 and 30 years in prison, the prosecutor had explained to me. At her age, that's equivalent to a life sentence. Knowing that Sarah could never hurt anyone else gave me peace, but it wasn't revenge I felt. It was more a sense of closure, of justice restored. One afternoon, while I was organizing my study, I found the first letter Sarah had written to me after meeting David. It was a thank you note for making her feel welcome in the family. Dear Charlotte, she had written in her perfect handwriting, I can't express how grateful I am to have such a wonderful mother-in-law. I hope one day to be the daughter-in-law you deserve. I read those words now with a completely different perspective. Sarah had been the daughter-in-law I deserved in the sense that she had been exactly the test I needed to prove my own strength. Because in the end, Sarah had accomplished something she hadn't intended. She had proven that at 60 years old, I was still the strong, intelligent woman I had been throughout my career. I wasn't losing my faculties. I was gaining wisdom. That night, David came over for dinner as he did every Friday since Sarah's arrest. As we cooked together in my kitchen, I realized that we had regained something more valuable than any money Sarah had stolen. We had regained our mutual trust. "Mom," David said as he chopped vegetables for the salad, "there's something I want to tell you." "What is it?" "These last few months, living here with you, watching you fight Sarah and win, have made me remember why I always admired you so much when I was a kid." His words filled me with emotion. "David, no, let me finish. No. You're the strongest person I know, and I'm so sorry I ever doubted that, even for a moment." That night, after David left, I sat in my living room, reading a book and enjoying a glass of wine. The house felt different. Now it was no longer the place where I had been manipulated and deceived. It was my home again, my sanctuary. Sarah had tried to take my money, my reputation, and my dignity. She had failed at all three. But more importantly, she had failed in her ultimate goal, to make me doubt who I really was. Because now, at 60 years old, I knew with absolute certainty who Charlotte Brooks was. A woman who had survived 25 years in the justice system, who had raised a good man, and who, when faced with the greatest test of her life, had had the wisdom and courage to fight, and she had won. Did you like my story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.